I hoped we'd never get here. I think deep down, I kind of knew we would be, but I didn't expect it to be this soon. Anyways, hey, what's happening? Welcome back to the channel. My name is D, and today I'm going to be talking about another update on the Milo Winter World of Guardian LLC saga and Milo Winter's new book. But before we get into all of that, I got to give a quick shout out to my Plus Ultra Don't Fretters, my top tier supporters on Patreon, JJ Valdez and Peggy Lou Who. Thank you both so much for your support. You are helping to ensure I'm able to keep creating content and put it out as frequently as possible. If you also want to help support the channel, get access to some bonus content, and get access to my private Discord server where you can chat with me and a bunch of other really lovely, nerdy, creative people, make sure to consider subscribing to my Patreon at patreon.com/thefretter. Free members of the Patreon have access to my monthly newsletter and as well as like polls for voting on different things that I'll talk about on this channel. And if you want to support the channel but you don't want another monthly subscription to manage, you could buy me a coffee at ko-fi.com/thefretter. All the money I make from Ko-Fi or the super thank yous here on YouTube go towards getting some video gear so I can keep making videos into 2026. The camera kit that I've been using for the last like 3 years of my content creation career is a big word, but the stuff I've been using isn't mine. It's actually my best friend's, and he needs it back. So in order to keep making videos, I need some gear. I have a camera body, but I'm still missing a few pieces for a kit of my own. And, after I get that stuff, any of those things also go towards like enhancing the production value of my YouTube videos. I have some ideas for some collaborative videos and yada, yada, yada. And anything you can give helps. But if you don't have any discretionary entertainment funds, to spend, or, you spend it on Danny Mata or somebody else that's cuter and funnier than me, that's fine. But please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. All right, so if you have no idea who Milo Winter is, where have you been? I'm just kidding. I hate it when people do that thing. Like, oh, you don't know this thing? Like it's a moral failing to not know. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's totally fine. I think it probably means you've been outside or spending time with your loved ones or locking in on your own creative endeavors. And those are way better ways to spend your time. Honestly, like whenever I tell my wife or one of my local friends about something that's happening on Book Talk, they look at me with such like concern, you know what I'm saying? Like more pity and worry than when I was actively recovering from my addictions. But if you don't know who Milo Winter is, or you don't know anything about the World of Guardian or Age of Scorpius or whatever, I've made videos about it in the past. There's other people who've made videos about it in the past. There's people who've like launched their YouTube careers from this saga. I'm not going to do a full recap where I like go through the events of what's happened thus far. I will link some videos down below. I'm not going to rehash or recap the whole thing because it's exhausting. In my last video on this topic, I think I said something to the effect of like, this is probably the final update from Milo Winter or something, and I had comments like, damn well this isn't over. And like, yeah, I did know, but I really hoped that after the release of Milo Winter's piece, High Disturbance, he was going to like go away, and not from a place of I dislike this person. I'm not a fan. I take a lot of issue with the way that he's conducted himself very publicly and the way he's treated readers, and there's a bunch of people who are out to money and times are tough, that's a serious thing, but I also don't like pray for his downfall. I mean, even if I did, like it's kind of happened, but that's beside the point. I just hoped for his sake and for the sake of all of Book Talk, kind of, he would go away for a little bit and like rest, work through some things, do some inner work, go to therapy, get better. And he didn't do that, like at all. 2 weeks later, and almost like a week ago, I was scrolling through TikTok, and I think I went to go search up like one of my friends or something like that. And then TikTok's search thing was like, yo, you wanna update? And I was like, what do you mean there's an update? What do you mean there's an update? That's crazy. But I'm messy and kind of nosy, so I went and I looked, and Milo was like, yo, I'll put out a new book. And I was like, oh no. And this time it's a poetry book called Afterlife. It's a collaboration, or it's illustrated by Solly, who is a member of the World of Guardian LLC team. And so given that I've talked about this author a fair bit, and the fact that I am a spoken word artist and poet, and I teach poetry workshops and creative writing classes to middle schoolers to young adults, I felt like this was a perspective that I could offer, you know what I mean? But I was still kind of hesitant, like I don't really want to keep talking about this author. And I also do stand-up comedy, And there's something about rehashing the same premise over and over and over again where it just gets really like creatively boring. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can only talk about how much my mother doesn't love me so many times on stage before I just get bored. I'm kidding. That's going to be like the theme of my special. Not that I'm working on a special or anything. If I ever got to do a special, that it'd probably be about that. But anyways, I don't know. It just felt like I was being kind of hacky if I kept talking about this author. But my patron's like, boy, if you don't shut your ass up and make the damn video. That's how they talk to me. Before we get into that, I'm going to talk a little bit about where I'm at now with this saga. Like, kind of go through my journey of this saga. So it's less of a recap and more like, I've had time, like, as this has gone on, my opinion has kind of changed and shifted. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. But if you're not interested in that part of the video, I will put a time code down below and you can skip around. So I think Age of Scorpius, which is Milo's debut, kind of, he'd like put it out before, or put out a book before when he was really, really young. Also, apparently this was up on Wattpad or AO3, I can't remember which one, for a while. So like, it's kind of a debut. And like, real quick, I'm already going off script. Debut shouldn't be that big a deal. Like, your first book shouldn't be your best book. And so all the ceremony and stuff, that can be exciting for sure. Like, you know, if I put out a special, my first special, I'll be really excited or whatever, but it shouldn't be your best one. Shouldn't be a breakout, you know? Like, nobody wants to be a one-hit wonder. Like, there's a lot of ceremony and like almost fetishization of youth and newness in the publishing industry, in the entertainment industry at large. I really feel like, you know, strike this off of your bingo card as well, Mo. I really feel like the way that author V.E. Schwab, say what you want about her books and her, I know a lot of people don't like her, but I'm just saying, like, she kind of like started real small and has really built until I think Addie LaRue was like her 20th book or something, and then exploded and isn't even like going back to Addie LaRue, but is continuing to be sort of weird and prolific and putting out a lot of stuff. But it was a build. It was like, I feel like if you want a creative career, the goal should be not the pursuit of virality and then explosion like a firework, because you'll burn out just as quickly, but rather strive for incremental and accumulative growth over time. I say all this to say, like, if you're about to debut, like, it's okay if you don't burst through the gate with gilded wheels, you know, just keep writing, keep working towards your craft, improve. And if nothing else, I've been thinking a lot about this, you know, like, I put out some stand-up comedy clips here on this channel, and it doesn't really like do well. Like, people really don't like that I do that, apparently. But the way I see it is I'm just adding to a backlog. So eventually, if someone does find a piece of my content that they do like, they're like, oh, this guy's funny, they can go through the whole playlist of stand-up eventually as I build it, you know? And they can either see my creative growth or they have a bunch of stuff that they can enjoy, whatever. And I just think that it should be more about laying a foundation and building something brick by brick rather than trying to blow up with every post, if that makes sense. Anyways, this popped off in July. This whole situation, I think, was starting to pick up in July. And this was a time where I actually was doing really poorly mentally and was dealing with my own stuff offline a little bit. I was still trying to maintain some sort of like, patrons didn't think I'd fallen off the face of the earth, and like I was posting on Instagram a little bit here and there, but I was really sorting through some mental health problems and trying to get support and get help. And I was trying to pretend like Book Talk didn't exist. I was trying to pretend like BookTube didn't really exist. And but the patrons and some other people I knew from the internet were talking about this, and I got a little curious. So I've had this like TikTok account that's sort of like a lurking account. You know, I just use it to like do research on topics or whatever. So I was like kind of looking into it here and there. And originally my plan was to make a video kind of talking about this situation and the parallels that I originally thought were there with the Million Lives Book Festival thing that happened. Because I was like, oh, maybe I can talk about what happens when you fly a little too close to the sun. Or is this like a new type of scammer who's taking advantage of Book Talk and like specifically fantasy fans and people who are looking for community and connection by way of their love of fantasy? Or is this the downside of the internet's removal of gatekeepers? One of the best things about the internet is that it's like, given people the power to take more agency in their creative work. Nowadays, you can release a song, a mixtape, a whole album from your bedroom. Like, you can make it in your bedroom and then just release it. You could put out a short film that you and your friends made on a $500 budget. You could put out a book with no editors or no executives, and I think that that's dope, and I think that that's awful. Also, I've done all of that shit, and it's fucking embarrassing, bro. Like, anybody can put out their creative work or put on an event. But also, the worst thing about the internet is that anyone can put out their work or create an event. And maybe I can still make a video talking about that if that's of interest to anybody. I don't know. I'm just screaming into the void by way of a camera. Camera does not chime in, give me insights or perspectives. It's not alive. But as I got more and more into these stories, I was seeing the difference, you know what I'm saying? And maybe because it was fresher and there's just more content being made about it, I got more drawn into the world of Guardian and everything that was going on there. And I felt like, from what I could see, that Milo was exhibiting traits that I'd seen in myself as a much younger person. I think when all this was popping off, like Milo's like 22, 23 or something like that, he reminded me a lot of me at like 17, 18. You know, I was really seeing myself in his like sense of entitlement to commercial success through his art and his iron grip on his creative vision and just unwillingness to let go or compromise or make changes or be edited. I said stuff like this when I was like a teenager, right? And then as the story goes on and we see him kind of crash out or make his like apology video, I was starting to sense this underlying deep-seated need to feel understood and to feel seen, you know what I mean? It's my understanding Milo recently came out, in High Disturbance, came out as a trans man, but still identified as queer before coming out as a trans man, and also is neurodivergent and stuff, and had gone through some very traumatic things. And while our experiences are very different, I also have gone through some pretty hard things and find myself in the margins. And I think all marginalized people, regardless of what part of their identity puts them on the margins, have this desire to be seen and embraced for who they are. And like, I used to be a youth worker, and I worked with a lot of neurodivergent queer kids, and a lot of them kind of exhibited similar traits to Milo, you know. And even as a poetry and writing teacher now, I do see those traits in some of my students. So I've been an artist like Milo, and I've taught and worked with a lot of artists like Milo. Poets, writers, singer-songwriters, doesn't matter. I feel like if you've been to any kind of writing class, you've met a Milo Winter, you know what I'm saying? And in a way, people talk about this author like he's an anomaly, like whoa, it's the craziest author to ever author. That's not true. This is just the one that went viral most recently. With all that said, though, it doesn't make any of how Milo's conducted himself or how he's treated people or how he's reacted to criticism okay. You can be understanding, see where someone's coming from, or see how someone like connects dots and still be like, yeah, but what you did was fucked up though. And I feel like the internet is really forgetting that multiple things can be true at the same time. The way that Milo reacted to criticism about, or not even criticism, but like people questioning his claims about being a master writer, the way that Milo reacted to criticism or questioning before Age of Scorpius came out was like, it was like rooted in arrogance, I think it was rooted in insecurity masquerading as arrogance. You know, he was backing up his claims of being a master writer by citing Malcolm Gladwell's theory of 10,000 hours. And after reading Gladwell's book, Outliers, where that theory comes from, I feel as though Milo didn't really grasp the material of Outliers, which is funny. And it's almost like a game of telephone where Milo is like, it's almost like a game of telephone where Milo is misinterpreting a book that is misinterpreting research about violin players. And the way that Milo reacted to the backlash after the release of Age of Scorpius is really inappropriate and very concerning. Milo seems to have put a lot of his self-worth and identity in being a successful author or CEO, entrepreneur, literary tech bro type of person. He needs this to be huge, and rather than, take any kind of criticism or self-reflect or implement edits in a proper way where the edits actually come through, he spun the narrative so much that I got dizzy. He shifted the blame so much. It's like it's everyone's fault. It's this random TikToker, it's the readers, it's the former editors, it's everybody but Milo. And the most upsetting part for me, the most infuriating part for me, is when Milo starts to not outright say but allude to this idea that his mental health and physical safety is on the line. So if you don't like this book, I'm not going to say what happens, but it won't be good and you'll feel real bad. You know what I'm saying? Because we didn't put Milo on a gravy train with biscuit wheels, he's in danger, and that's on us. And that's fucked up. And I don't know if that was like intentionally manipulative or if it's that this kid's need for success. Like, it's not just like, oh, I need money. It's like, I need this to be huge. I need this to be, I don't even know how to word it, man. But like, it's like, okay, so like when I was younger, like I actually probably was around Milo's age when I started to think like this. And it took me until I was like in my mid to late 20s to let that shit go. But I had this notion of like, I have these dreams of being a successful musician. I'm not, by the way, so that didn't work out. And if I don't, by the time I'm like 40, I'm going to be this like bitter old man working in the trades like a loser with unrealized dreams. I feel like in some ways the anime One Piece really fucked me up because it gave me this notion that if you don't live out your dreams, you're just going to become a fat, ugly villain. And that's something I should probably bring up in counseling and not on the internet. But yeah, I feel like Milo like put a lot on the readers or on his audience or literally the internet in general of like anyone who's like didn't love the book or didn't or won't doesn't anyone who didn't love my book is one of my reasons why kind of language. And it was very upsetting. And as somebody who struggles with SI himself, I'm like, that's fucked up. You're kind of like trivializing mental illness to leverage like people being like, oh, poor baby sweetie, never mind, it's a literary masterpiece, I can't wait for the movie, video game, album to come out. But to me, I think like Milo kind of serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of a young creative going viral and not really being able to handle it. I don't think we as human beings were really wired to handle virality. Every time I've gone viral, it's gone badly for me. I went off on a whole rant about the last time I went mini viral. I'm just like not including that in the video. I don't want to talk about it. But I have this suspicion that even if Age of Scorpius had been a good book, that this like borderline overnight success of Milo Winter would have been detrimental to his mental health because he's probably been struggling with it prior to this release. And, in some of his talking about the book, and the world that he's built, because that's the thing he really cares about. He doesn't really seem to care about writing or craft or whatever, but he really cares about his identity as a writer, his identity as an entrepreneur, and he cares about this fantasy world, which I kind of get because, like, a lot of people will tell you that you have to learn to love the process or whatever, but the process is fucking boring. The process is daunting, and it's hard to love that. I think you need to respect the process and go through like proper channels. If you're going to like publish something, even if you're going to do it independently, you should do everything you can to, make sure that it's a high quality product. Because once you put your work out for people to consume, it's a product, and there needs to be a certain degree of professionalism and quality that comes with people giving you their hard-earned dollars. They don't owe you their hard-earned money just because you have a dream. And that's a thing I think a lot of authors on Book Talk don't really understand. A lot of comedians don't understand that either. Because of the way he talks about this book and stuff like that, I think instead of like going to therapy or getting like mental health support or whatever, and like, the first video I made, people called The World of Guardian like a maladaptive daydream or something like that. And I do think it's that, I think The World of Guardian has been called a paracosm. I don't know much about that because I don't have one. It's like an imaginary fantasy world where you like retreat to within yourself or whatever. And I think I probably didn't stick to one as a kid. Like I drew a lot of comic books and wrote a lot of stuff. But I think it was like I kind of had a lot of fun with like the newness of like, oh, I'm gonna do like a Batman inspired thing over here, and then I'm gonna do a Robin Hood thing over here, and I invented Arrow, and that was me, and I'm so sorry, I didn't mean for that to happen. I'm just kidding, I didn't do that. But you know, like this was his way of dealing with his trauma or not dealing with his trauma, you know, avoiding it or something. And it was his way of like coping with the harsh realities of life, which was to not cope with reality, I guess. I have always suspected that part of why he had this need for this thing to be huge was so he didn't have to, you know, work a normal job or live a normal life. He could just, you know, not worry about groceries or rent or maybe even a mortgage or something, and live in the world of Guardian as much as humanly possible. That's like my one of my theories as to why this was so important to him. And he even said, like, this is more important to me than my own life or whatever, which, again, so scary. If that's where you're at with your creative stuff, like, go get medical help. You know what I'm saying? No work of art is worth your well-being. I know that people love the starving artist or the struggling artist or the tortured artist, whatever. I think all that shit's played out. Somebody disagreed with me the last time I said that because they thought I was saying like no artist should be sad. And what I'm actually trying to say is it's just not worth laying yourself on the altar of your own creativity. Yeah, when bad stuff happens, like I make a lot of my work, a lot of my poetry and a lot of my comedy is rooted in the hard things that I've gone through. That's fine. That's not a tortured artist. That's somebody processing their pain and alchemizing it into something beautiful. You know, that's like part of why I still do what I do. I came to this story and I was trying to offer the perspective of somebody who's like kind of been, I don't think I was ever this bad. Maybe like the people I went to high school with who had to deal with me at that age would probably say otherwise, but I don't think I was ever this, I was definitely not this mean to people. You know what I mean? Like I think I'd be like, nah, I'm gonna just do my own thing. I'd brush them off. I don't think I was this smug, you know, because I knew I wasn't smart. But I was like trying to offer this perspective of somebody who had sort of been there, you know, and I tried to offer up reminders about like, take it slow, you know, strive for accumulative incremental growth in your career. Remember why it is that you like doing this thing, you know, because you gotta remember there's going to be, if you do decide to be an artist professionally, whether you do it independently or you want to get signed or get a publishing deal or whatever, there's going to be a lot of low lows and there's got to be a lot of high highs. And during those low lows, it's good to remember your why. And that was something that was really important to me to communicate in my first video about this. And after my second video where I was just like, I'm going to read Outliers because I didn't even know I didn't know who Malcolm Gladwell was. Kind of wish I still didn't. And I thought that the 10,000 hours thing was just like an expression. Because every time I'd heard it, someone would say, they say. And so I just thought it was kind of like the early bird gets the worm type shit. I didn't realize it was from a book. And I read the book and put out that second video. People were just like, not even people don't watch these videos. They just see who it's about and then offer their essay about why they dislike this person and why they want to see him tarred and feathered. You know what I'm saying? But like I was pretty done with the situation. Like I didn't really care about the Patreon updates. I didn't really care when it looked like he was fleeing the country, because I was like, you know, he can't. Like if it's about trying to run away with the money, they'll find you, bro. Like good luck. And I barely cared when High Disturbance first came out. Like, you know, I think I'd just seen a couple other people make videos about it, and I was like, okay, I'll watch the video. And then I was like, oh, damn, stopped watching the video, and then went and read it for myself or something. I guess I was just curious about his side of things and curious about what he thinks of everything. And there's a little bit of self-reflection. There's a little bit of like, oh, my book actually isn't that good. Crazy that was the first time he read it. That still kind of drives me nuts. To be honest, it kind of almost read to me like a quadruple down. It almost felt like, spoilers for the end of My Hero Academia, it's almost like when Shigaraki dies and he's like, tell Spinner I tried to destroy until the end or whatever. Just kind of like, nah, fuck y'all. You know, there's no absolution, there's no redemption. It's just I'm going down and I'm sticking to my guns, and I don't respect it. I was gonna be like, but I kind of respect it, but I just don't respect it. You know, it's like this cognitive inflexibility, this unwillingness to listen, this unwillingness to learn, I think, or at least that's how it comes off. Like maybe the learning is a slow process, and you know, part of like letting go of a narrative about yourself, like that you're a brilliant writer, or that you know how to run a business, or that your fantasy world paracosm thing's going to be the next Harry Potter theme park, hologram theater play, silent disco thing. I don't know. I feel like it is kind of like, it feels maybe over the top to say it's like an ego death, but I guess it is, you know, and the ego wants to preserve itself. And so letting go of these narratives about yourself and letting go of your own self-image feels like dying. And so I guess what we're witnessing, or what we've witnessed, is a slow and painful death. You know, in High Disturbance, Milo kind of talks about like how who he was before has died and now he's a new person, and that feels like a way of trying to escape accountability. It's like when, like, you know, like when I was going to make a video about the Million Lives connected with this story, I was also going to talk about a former friend who ripped me off and set me up for an almost catastrophic, humiliating failure. And if it weren't for my actual friends and collaborators who are part of Thalia Productions, it would have been a catastrophic, humiliating failure. And like, that person is the kind of person who'd say like, oh, I don't need to ask D for forgiveness, I forgive myself. And I feel that same kind of vibe at the end of High Disturbance, sort of, and be like, anyone who's reading this hates me and wants me to die, and I'm the most hated book talk author ever. And I'm like, I feel like a lot of people were more like dead ass crazy than they were like, burn the witch. There are definitely people out there being like, burn the witch, though. You know, and that's why I compared Milo to Shigaraki, a villain. People want this dude to be the villain so badly, you know? And certainly, Milo is antagonistic to literally anybody who isn't a complacent yes man or a hype man or a glazer. That's true. I just don't see this person as like book talk evil incarnate. I'm sorry. And I got a weird amount of heat in my last video for not being like angry or harsh enough about this whole situation. Not even the last video. Some podcast was like coming at me a little bit for some book talk controversy from like 2 years ago, where they're like, I don't understand why this dude's so nice. I'm not nice. I try to be understanding when I can be. Not even trying to be understanding to give whomever I'm talking about the benefit of the doubt. I try to be respectful and understanding towards people, for the people who watch the videos. Like, I got a lot of positive comments from people saying thank you for respecting Milo's new pronouns and new name. I also got a bunch of transphobic comments and people telling me, you're being scammed. And I'm like, grow up. One, it's not my place to speculate on somebody else's gender and sexuality. It's not really my business, especially when that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. Even if they're pulling a Kevin Spacey, I can still be like, the thing they did was fucked up. That's kind of the whole crazy thing about pulling a Kevin Spacey. We're still like, yeah, but you done like some pretty bad stuff. You a bad dude, gay or not, you know what I'm saying? Now you're just trying to make gay people look bad. But that's like not really my place to speculate on somebody, you know, because I'm not really a member of the LGBTQ plus community. A lot of my viewers are queer or trans, and I'm not going to send the message that if you step out of line or you behave in a way that I don't approve of, I'm going to invalidate your identity and be homophobic or transphobic towards you. That's fucked up. So I'm trying to be respectful and understanding towards, like, I try to approach these things as like respectfully and understandingly as I can, not because I like I'm not trying to be a nice guy. I'm trying to make sure that people who watch my videos don't accidentally catch a stray when they're just trying to like put something on while they do the dishes or work on their art homework or cook dinner or something like that. What is that? Soup? There's another book talk drama I want to talk about because I think it's almost like a cautionary tale for content creators, and it involves a trans person. And just because I don't like how this person talks about other people or how this person behaves, I'm not going to be transphobic. That's just that it's giving liberal man who makes leftist leaning content so that he can be misogynistic to right-wing women. You know what I'm saying? It's giving white male comedian who makes fun of white women so he can be sexist. And I just don't want to do that. That's not really me being nice or polite. That's just me like not wanting to be a hypocrite, I guess. Yeah, people wanted me to be like, this motherfucker's a scammer. And I don't really think that he's a scammer, you know? I think that he's a young person who got in over his head and was like, well, how hard can it be to run a business? And it turns out it's pretty fucking hard, you know? Like, it's easy to start a business. Like, I got my business name like that. But it's really hard to run a successful business, you know? Keep it, like, afloat. People wanted jokes and drama, not just defending a narcissist, which... that's weird. That's weird because I'm not defending him. I never said anything that he did was okay because I don't think it's okay. I'm just saying I think this is how we got here. You know, it feels like not just media literacy, but like social media literacy is going down, is decline. It feels like not just media literacy, but social media literacy is in decline, and people think that anything short of like demanding Milo Winter's head on a platter is like defending him. And it's not even, it can't be one or the other, it can be in the middle, because I'm not in the middle. I'm just like, oh, I think this is how we got here. That's crazy though. People want it. I got a comment that was like, we want jokes and drama, not defending this narcissistic bullshit. And I'm sitting there like, I didn't defend him. Also, I'm not a trained mental health professional. I'm not going to call someone a narcissist because I'm not qualified to do that. I could have said that Milo exhibits tendencies a lot like the friend I talked about before, who a trained professional I do know had said that this person exhibits like the traits of a vulnerable narcissist. But I'm not an expert in that field. So I didn't want to throw around the word because I think that the word narcissist gets thrown around so much it's losing its meaning. It's losing its like intensity, its weight, as people throw it around on the internet not knowing what they're talking about. You know what I'm saying? And as a survivor of abuse from a couple of different narcissists, I don't want to take that shit lightly. Again, there's also probably people who watch these videos who have been abused by narcissists, and I don't want to trivialize what they've gone through. Those tendencies are there, but I don't know this guy. And I'm not an expert, like I just said, so I wasn't going to throw that around. The comment sections in any of the videos that I've made about Milo feel like they're full of villagers from Frankenstein with their torches and their pitchforks. They're like residents of Oz, and I'm supposed to be the Tin Man. Sorry, I'm just not Ethan Slater. And it does come off like shut up and dribble. It comes off like do the thing, monkey. And thankfully, this is just a loud minority. Most of the OGs on my channel are dope, and there's a lot more like positive people who are just like, oh, you know, like you seem like a chill guy who talks about art and books and stuff, and that's pretty neat. And I appreciate those comments, and I appreciate those kind of viewers because you're chill, and I appreciate that. You know, I was telling my wife a little bit about like how people were getting mad at me for not being like cruel or harsh when I'm talking about these people, and she was like, that's really sad. You know, it's sad that there are people out there who want to be even angrier than we all already are. And I think the people who've like doxed this dude or been transphobic to this dude or homophobic, ableist, whatever to this dude, just because they don't like how he moves, I think that's fucked up. I think that's immature, and I don't want to contribute to that. And if you think that's defending him, I think that that's just like, I think that that's a reason for you to look inward and be like, why am I trying to like why am I trying to be part of an angry mob? You know what I mean? Because I feel like, again, that is such a huge, and again, that's such a loud minority for the situation. I think a lot more people were kind of watching this the same way you might watch a burning building. I remember one time driving home from I was coming from out of town. I think I'd done a show. This has been years ago, so I was like, I must have played a show a couple hours away from where I was living, and on the highway, as I was getting close to where I lived, there was a warehouse on fire and a bunch of people just standing outside the warehouse. I literally pulled over and just kind of watched that fucker burn for a second. I feel like a lot more people had that sort of energy, but there is just this loud minority who's like, we got to dox him. We got to put his legal full name out there. We need to do all this, that, and the other to punish him for being conceited. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like, that's upsetting. So this is kind of like a looking back on the whole thing. I didn't want to recap it, but I just want to, I get like more thoughts came up and my opinions kind of changed as I thought about it a little bit more, yada yada yada. This video is gonna be so fucking long and I'm really sorry. Sorry mostly to, I don't know if it's me, Ryan, or Raph who's gonna edit this, but whoever it is, I'm sorry. So before I get into this review, again, I'm not an expert, you know, I'm not a professor or anything like that. I am a spoken word artist and a poet and a comedian, and I started teaching because my ex is an English teacher, and she asked me to come to her school to teach workshops for her poetry unit for her students, and that's how I got into it. And then it kind of went from there. I started working with an organization. They would send me to different schools, and then some schools just kept bringing me back, and there's a couple schools where I'm like the creative writing teacher, so I come in and teach for extended periods of time and stuff. Much like book reviews with a regular dude, I'm not an expert, I'm not a professor. You know, you can not like some of this stuff and think that my opinions are whack, but these are just my opinions. I do mostly free verse poetry, and that's what I teach my kids. Like, I generally don't work with form, like iambs and meters and stuff like that, unless the kid wants to, and then we'll work on the form together. I'll do something like Golden Shovel, or maybe a style of poem like an obit or something like that. But I'm just saying this, I'm not an authority on poetry. I'm not an expert. So if you disagree with my reviews, that's fine. Yeah, I don't know, relax. Something that I found really interesting about this book as I read it is, like, in the author's note, which I'll get to near the end of the review, Milo points out, or Milo says that he started working on this in high school, which is kind of interesting because a lot of the, like, when he would double down or even lash out at people, he would say that the only thing he wanted to write was the world of Guardian, but these poems don't have anything to do with that. So I feel like maybe he was being like kind of hyperbolic because he was emotional, or maybe it's like he was writing poetry for class and just had to. I don't really know, but I just thought that was interesting. I was like, oh, like, you do write outside of that. And like, people question my assertion that I think High Disturbance is better written than Age of Scorpius, and I just think it is because I understood what was being said in High Disturbance, whereas like the bits that I was able to read online of Age of Scorpius, confusing, redundant. Once he's not writing in the world of Guardian, he's a better writer. It's not like worlds different, but it is a noticeable difference to me, and it's easier to understand what he's trying to communicate. So getting into Afterlife by Milo Prather, or Milo Winter. Another thing I want to talk about before we get into the book itself is that this is a collaboration between him and his artist friend Solly. I think they're friends. I don't think they're dating. Maybe who cares? That has nothing to do with anything, and honestly, none of my business. But it's in collaboration with Solly, and Solly's artwork is really pretty. Like, visually, this is a really interesting looking book, and if I didn't know who this was, I would probably get a physical copy and give it to some of my students to be like, look how creative you can be. Because some of my students write and do visual art, and it'd be cool to see what they create. I have a friend who also plays with like where words end up on the page in her books, and I think she does collaborate with not a visual artist but a photographer a lot, and make some really beautiful looking work. But yeah, so the dedication of this book is to those chained by their ghosts. you are stronger than their whispers. And that's a bit of an eye roll. I think, I don't know what it feels like to be the focal point of an internet controversy of this scale, where content creators are launching careers based off of your mistakes. I don't know how that feels, but again, going back to high disturbance and going back to things that Milo has said about this whole situation, I think it's a little over dramatic. I think to be like, people didn't like my art and it's killing me. People wanting a refund because they thought they were getting an edited high quality product and I didn't deliver that, and that's the worst thing that could ever happen, is a little over the top from an outsider's perspective. So this did kind of make me roll my eyes. I'm not going to go through all the poems. There's a lot in here that is very personal, and it touches on like SA, coercion, SI, and all this stuff. And some of it feels so raw and so personal that it just doesn't sit right with me to share that work for the purpose of reviewing, knowing that there are people who are going to watch this video in bad faith. I just don't want, it just doesn't sit right with me. It just doesn't feel good. It didn't feel good. Like one of them I wanted to talk about because I think that there's a lot to talk about in the piece, but I kept thinking about people who just want to shit on this guy, people who just want to be transphobic, people who just want to be, I think there are a lot of people who are probably also a Milo Winter who just want to be like, well, I'm not like that, so, because they didn't go viral or whatever. But it didn't feel right. So I'm not going through a lot of the poems. I'm going through a few just to highlight my review of this book, and then we're done. Also, Milo added a bunch of resources into his book that kind of pertain to like the issues that he's talking about in the book. And I think that that's good. Like I did a similar thing in my second chapbook, and I think that like any poet or nonfiction writer or even fiction writer who touches on these subjects, I think that that's a good thing to do. Sometimes like the more conservative side of the bookish internet space gets really butthurt over like trigger warnings or whatever. And I think the trigger warnings are fine. I think they're good and responsible, but I think this is like the next step is like, hey, not only do I kind of touch on these things, and if you're not comfortable with hearing about these things, maybe, maybe don't read this. To take it a step further and back, and also if you're struggling and you weren't aware of this resource, this is a website you can check out, this is a phone number you can call. He's been more responsible in this regard of like adding trigger warnings and adding like almost like a legend for the trigger warnings, and then also providing these resources. So like, I guess credit is where credit's due. He's been a little more responsible with mental health than he was when he was just being like, I'm going crazy and it's your fault. So the first poem I want to talk about is called Canine and the Core. And I'm not going to recite the whole poem or anything like that. I will put it on the screen. And one of the first things that kind of stood out to me is like, this is something that if a student like submitted this to me for me to mark, I would probably cite that the way that the lines are broken makes for a cool shape, and that's visually interesting, but it does make it confusing to read as we go down, because it's like, how long was it until the spark was thrown, tooth and claw crashed? And if you wrote it, you're well aware that that's not how it's supposed to be read, but if you didn't write it, you don't know that, and it can be confusing for the reader, and I probably would have docked marks for that. I've never been a fan of this sort of like evergreen mother, she who once stood tall, diseased and gray, her like it feels a little like Shakespeare, but not in a good way for me. You know what I mean? Like, I get what's being said. We're talking about trees. Again, this is an adult. I think if a student like submitted this to me, I would probably take their grade into consideration. Like, at the main school that I go to, I work with 10th grade to 12th grade students. I think if a 10th grader gave this, I'd be like, oh, this is pretty dope. Given that this is an adult, this reads as like this wasn't edited with the reader in mind. It wasn't formatted with the reader in mind. It's more about the spectacle of it. A creature escaping a forest, the flames lick and nip at a terror-tucked tail. I don't love terror-tucked tail. Escaping or trapped. That stanza really bugs me. It's kind of clunky. I do think that like using lick and nip when the poem is called Canine and the Core, that's thematically cohesive, so that's good, but the whole stanza bugs me, if that makes sense. Pack animals, we disconnected from our instinct. Again, it's the way that it's laid out on the page. Can't even be that you're trying not to block out the art that Sully made, because the most visually interesting part is blocked by the text. I think that this could be sort of maybe trying to illustrate decay and withering and reducing, but when you're sacrificing the reader, the ability to read it cohesively to try to illustrate another point, I think that you're it's almost being too meta. It's almost like too M. Night Shyamalan for me to like it. Like I really like Sully's art. Like I keep thinking like, man, if the poems were better and I didn't know who this was, I would probably be a fan, but more like as a piece of art than as like something to read. This poem, it's a little bit shorter, Thanatophobia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I am equally afraid of death's touch as much as I crave its comfort. Numbness of nothingness. It's a little redundant. Silence of the soil's embrace, ashes rushing with rapids. Standing in this river alive. Thanatophobia, they call it. My life ahead gleams with uncertainty's hope, the terror of knowing I left a moment too early. I fight with everything in me, hostile to this pain, petrified of my scythe. I refuse to lose this battle to my own front lines. The numbness of nothingness is kind of redundant for me. I think numbness, nothingness, silence of the soil's embrace probably would have hit a little bit harder for me. I understand what he's trying to communicate. I think for me it is just the numbness of nothingness. I think numbness, nothingness, the silent would have hit a little more for me personally. I don't want to pick apart everything in here because I don't do that for my book reviews as much. Like I make a lot of jokes and I'll be like, oh, like this affects my immersion, or I don't personally like these aspects of it, but I don't usually go line by line and be like, man, fuck this book, despite what some of the A Court of Thorns and Roses fans say about me. I fight with everything in me, hostile to this pain, petrified of my scythe. Think the personification of pain and it being afraid of a scythe I didn't know was there. Sometimes when people do poetry, they will use like synonyms without realizing that each synonym also comes with some like nuances that can change what you're talking about. Like, okay, this is oh man, I don't really want to get into this because I'm inviting a whole other. My camera died. I have no idea when I was talking about, so we're gonna go back a little bit. So in Thanatophobia, there's a line in the first stanza that kind of bugs me. It's the numbness of nothingness, silence of the soil's embrace, ashes rushing with rapids. I feel like numbness of nothingness is really redundant, and I would almost rather it be two different things in a list, numbness, nothingness. It's the silence of the soil's embrace, and it kind of like, in my mind, it hits a little bit harder, and it also has this more of a build. It goes from like, I feel nothing to like, I am a part of nothing. I'm in the ground. I've been cremated or something like that. And that just would have hit a little bit harder, would have packed a little bit more of an emotional punch for me personally. I don't want to pick apart the whole piece. I don't want to read it out because like I didn't used to do that for a book. Well, no, I guess I did like break down the plot, but I didn't break it down line by line, and I'm trying to avoid doing some of that. And then I fight with everything in me, hostile to this pain, petrified by my scythe. The personification of pain and the introduction of a scythe, but I had no idea this was a thing or this was going to be a part of it beforehand is a little confusing just for me personally. And at least my interpretation is that pain is like being personified and it's afraid of Milo's scythe that he's wielding. And, you know, that's a little bit of a fantasy thing. And, like, again, if a student submitted this to me, I probably would have been like, hey, like, do a little bit more to personify pain so that I understand that pain is being personified and that pain is afraid of you. And I might even be enough of a jackass to be like, also, what's the deal with this scythe? Why are you fighting with a scythe? That's for anime. You say sword. Sometimes people want to use synonyms in poetry because it sounds more poetic, but it makes less sense because synonyms come with different nuances. Like Taylor Swift in one of the songs from her new album talks about like paying the check before it kisses the mahogany grain. And she's very proud of that line because you really got to think about it. Except no, you fucking don't. But like kissing the mahogany grain creates nuances that are unnecessary and confusing when touches is right there. And sometimes being simple and straightforward in your lyricism or your poetry is more effective. I think that there's this thing amongst writers, especially like when we've talked about romanticy and we talk about like lyricism or whatever. There's some people who think that if we can't understand what you're saying, it's good and you're smart, and that's not true. It's kind of like when anime used to be really complicated with its magic or its power system or whatever. Be like, oh, you have to like do the math to be a real fan or whatever. That's bullshit. Like, art should be accessible, and if you're gonna be playing with language is still meant to be a communication tool. You know, like we should know what you're trying to say. Absolutely, entendres, layers, metaphors, all that's great. I'm just saying that like sometimes people use a synonym to seem smarter, but it's just confusing. Remember that episode of Friends when Joey was a reference for Monica and Chandler adopting, and he instead of saying like they have big hearts, he said they have sizable aortic pumps or whatever. It's that. And then the next poem is Eat My Young. Like, it's interesting, this one is kind of structured in a way where there's, again, my main beef with some of these is just the way that they're formatted. It's meant to look pretty, but it creates kind of more of a confusing, like, reading experience for the page reader. And that's a big thing that I talk to my students about is like, hey, if you're just reciting spoken word, you can format it however that makes sense for you to read, so you know where you're going to pause, or you know where you're going to like take a breath, or even like when you're going to yell. You know, like one of my students that I've worked with for a couple years, he would do this thing where when he knew he was going to yell, he would draw the word in like big block graffiti letters so you'd remember. And it's stuff like that. But when you're like translating spoken word onto the page, or you're writing poetry on the page, you should have it in like, how do I make sure that people know how I would say it or how it's supposed to be said? Because some of this formatting is kind of whack. So it's like what I'm talking about is like, I have been raised to compete in my own ring. Death matches are in my nature is how I would think I'm supposed to read this stanza. But just saying the phrase death matches are in my nature feels more natural to say, so I don't understand why you wouldn't just format it that way unless you're like, well, we can't move the art over, which to make the art smaller. Also, like just the line, I am obsessed with restarting. I'm like, I'm glad that you know this about you, because it feels like the author has this belief that if he just restarts, no one will remember the past things that he did. And it's the internet. They'll remember for a while. You know what I'm saying? This next one, Hellhound's Maw. I race at my memories with an open jaw. I don't love that phrasing. Like, if the idea is you're the predator and you're hunting something, like you're a wolf hunting your own memories, like jaws open or mouth open just makes a little bit more sense to me. I am nitpicking. Sorry, I think my teacher brain is kicking in, and I didn't want that to happen. A beast with red eyes, a snarl that frightens the bear. I actually kind of like the line, a snarl that frightens the bear. I don't know why. It just sounds nice. With my students, it's like, I always try to be like, hey, balance between what makes sense to say and what kind of feels good to say. Because sometimes, like I speak a little bit differently when I'm performing, when I'm doing comedy, and I highlight different words because it feels better to say, even if it's not grammatically correct. I'm just noticing now canines comes up so much in this book. I guess I know what your favorite animal is. Homie loves wolves, okay? And I get it, wolves are dope. When I was a little kid, I was like 7, I did a whole book report about wolves. Technically, one of the fantasy novels I want to put out is mostly about wolves. Werewolves, but wolves nonetheless. Another line in this poem, because again, I'm not trying to break down the whole thing, but another line that stands out to me is how sweet the blood tastes when tainted with justice. Your family cannot save you now. It wouldn't be tainted. Like mixed was right there. Just because like the nuances of certain words change the meaning a little bit. And so I just think like mixed with would have been a little bit more neutral, and it would have made the sweet part feel like more positive and thus a little bit more disturbing. You know what I'm saying? And then Nightfire, I think it's one of the last poems it is the last poem in the book. I kind of like it. I think that the green fire above us is supposed to be like the northern lights, and that is illustrated by the illustration. And I think it's almost like a bittersweet ending sort of thing. It's unsettling. It feels like the end of a movie where it's not quite happy, it's not quite sad, but it is the end of the story kind of thing. Pointing up at the paths of the auroral ribbons and stuff like that. There is something throughout this whole book that kind of irritates me, and it's the switch from like poetic to blunt, as I call it. So like I would say that a lot of my poetry, especially when I'm not rhyming, is blunt, where it's like not trying to be timeless and it's not trying to be pretty. It's very straightforward, and because of that, it's kind of modern, a little rough around the edges. There's like some lines in this book. There are some lines in this book where it's like pretty, blunt, pretty, or it's just blunt for like 2 lines, and then it's pretty for 8 stanzas or something like that. And that's kind of jarring. It's a little like if it were music, it's like going full band, acapella, full band, acapella for like just random lyrics and stuff. And it doesn't feel like throughout the whole book, a lot of like, it still reads like it wasn't edited that much, and it was edited by Milo. That's what it reads like to me, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I think when there's a little less, in my opinion, to look out for with free verse poetry than full-on prose, like narrative prose or nonfiction or something like that. But it does read like Milo did edit this and checked for spelling errors and checked for some things, but a lot of like cohesion was sacrificed for how it looks on the page. And yeah, I think there's not a lot of cohesion in like how these things read or what kind of language is used, and that's a little frustrating. I do think that this is better than Age of Scorpius, and people called me a liar for saying that before. It's not one of the greatest poetry books I've ever read, and I think if a student had given me this project as like their final project, because one of the courses that I do teach, they do submit like a chapbook. It's not nearly this long. It's like supposed to be 10 to 15 or something. I would probably give it a relatively high mark, but that's me saying like if a kid gave this to me, so I guess that's kind of condescending. I guess because it's a book review, I can say like I'd probably give this like 2.5, maybe even 3. I understand that a lot of people are like out for blood. I think that it's a little over the top. I think knowing about a little bit about this, there's part of me that's like, okay. And there's other ones that like I think were a little like shocking, and that's the point, I do think that Milo's maybe a better nonfiction writer or a better poet than he is a novelist. Just personally, I like I said, once he's out of the world of Guardian, I think that he could be a good writer. Like And I would give this like a pretty high mark. I think it's a little over the top sometimes. It's a little inconsistent, and cohesion was sacrificed for aesthetics, I guess. And it seems like he's really passionate about visual art. That was a big thing with the Age of Scorpius and the whole team and all that shit. So yeah, I would probably give it like 2.5, 3 stars out of 5. You can get mad at me about that if you want. I actually don't give a fuck. And then at the end, there's an author's note where Milo says his collection began in high school, eventually growing to become a 40,000 word project pared down to the contents of this book. For the last 5 years, I've poetically recorded my journeyings through landscape and lessons alike. I find a particular fascination with the intersectionality between the natural world, emotion, and memory. This book contains poetry that was written in Kansas, Colorado, Alaska, Yellowstone National Park, Finland, and Norway, all the places I lived from age 18 to 23. I decided to publish my poetry. This part's the thing that was really interesting to me. I decided to publish my poetry at the foot of my creative gravestone, my answer to the artist's wrath I found walking through a cemetery in Oslo at midnight in the snowy Nordic valley I am in right now. So I don't know if that's him saying, this is the last thing I'm putting out. I don't believe that for a second, but I think it's interesting if that is what he means. Feel like this might be a little over the top. Because the world of Guardian, I don't think it would ever be the thing that he wanted it to be, where there's a theme park, movie franchises, Pedro Pascal's in it for some reason. I don't know. But like, I think it still could have been a good or a decent indie series if he had just like gone away, re-edited the book and put it out, because people were still rooting for him even in the beginning. There might even still be people rooting for him. I don't know if they're there, because they're definitely not commenting on these videos that I make, but I assume that there's going to be people, like, if you put out a good fantasy novel, there'd be people being like, good for you. But yeah, and then the end of the author's note's kind of like a benediction or whatever. But yeah, I think that, like, I feel like you if at first you don't succeed, try again sounds trite, but I do believe that. And I do believe that he could still try again. I don't know if I would read it or review it or anything like that. Like, I might be done with this story now. But yeah, I don't think it had... I guess, like, again, this whole thing feels like a cautionary tale. And this part of it is, like, if you do fail or you don't succeed, or your creative vision or the results you want don't happen or whatever, you can take another shot. You don't have to like write a whole poetry book and then be like, I'm laying this at my creative gravestone, and now I'm done with art forever and always. Because I think there's a middle ground of acknowledging the mistakes you made as a younger person. There's acknowledging that you treated people horribly. There's acknowledging that you're really arrogant and entitled. And then like, and I want to be better, and I'm going to try to be kinder to people, and I'm going to work on my craft, and I'm going to learn to hold respect for the process and all this stuff, and then put out like the fully fleshed out version of the book you wanted to write, maybe even a different story, but it's set in the same world, and you could do it again, and maybe like 100 people buy it. But like, most books don't sell more than like 100 copies in their lifetime or something like that, right? So that would have been fine. I don't know. I'm just saying. I feel like not sad for this kid, like, oh, poor baby sweetie, but almost like pity, which is condescending. I understand that, but I'm just like, that's too bad. This all could, though. That's the whole theme of the thing for me. Is like, it's too bad. Again, I know people want jokes and drama, and they want me to be like, man, fuck this motherfucker and all this shit. But for me, it is more just like, man, that's sad, dog. Like, my first EP as a musician was a creative catastrophe, and I'm not even close to wanting to talk about that shit. And every kind of music thing I ever tried ended in like friendships ending, me being taken advantage of or something like that, and just like feeling really burnt and whatever. But my answer wasn't to be like, and I'm never creating again. I transitioned into... Well, I guess I was already doing poetry, but I kind of moved away from music, and now I'm focusing on another art form, and you can still create. So, maybe Milo has more of a future as like doing books about his naturalism research and doing more poetry or something like that. Or maybe, I don't know, Wattpad or a blog or something. I don't know. I hope that like eventually he does get the help and support and care that he needs. Because I still think like it was too soon to come back. I still think that. But I hope that if he ever does come back in full swing, he'll have taken some time to reflect and grow and get therapy and all this stuff. And, I hate to say, like, I hope this humbles him, because I don't think he should have had to go through this to be humbled. But I hope that he learns humility. And I hope that anybody who's been witnessing this doesn't get scared from publishing and doesn't get scared from trying, I think if anything else, like, you've seen how not to react to criticism, and you see that if you care about your project this much, that your mental well-being is on the line. Like, maybe I shouldn't share it, and I should just print off some copies so that my mom can have one for her shelf and I can have one to prove that I finished a thing or whatever. Because you can still make an ambitious project and then not share it. You can do that. And now I'm just kind of rambling. I don't really know if this is the last we're going to ever hear from Milo. I deep down, I do expect he'll come back at some point. But, I hope that we can all learn something from this. I think for me, it was like, I think there was a lot to learn and a lot to be reminded of. And in some ways, I think this did help contextualize some stuff that I'm working on within myself and also where I'm at creatively. And yeah, if you're a writer or whatever, and you're about to debut, or you're an independent writer and or like maybe you've been writing and now you're scared to publish because you don't want this to happen to you. It won't. A lot of this was a hell of his own making. So you should be fine. But no matter what, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm sorry it was so fucking long. Thank you to all the patrons who supported me. Patreon.com/SteveFredder if you want to support the channel. Bonus content, join the Discord, or sign up for free, get the monthly newsletter, and be able to vote on this channel. I'm not talking politically. Kodashfi.com if you want to buy me a coffee, help me get some video gear so I can keep making videos. And please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. That's pretty much it. Thanks so much. Bye.